Food. We all love it. We all eat it. And every country in the world has something they can claim to be their own. Whether it's France's baguettes and croissants, which originated in Austria, or Japan's tempura, which originated in Portugal, or the classic English tea and biscuits, which originated in China and France, respectively. But there's one country that, for whatever reason, a lot of people online, and some people I've met in my personal life, seem to think doesn't have its own food culture, and doesn't have any dishes that originate from it, and that of course is the number one country, the United States of America. Yes, despite leading the world in obesity, some people genuinely think that there's no food that originates in the US, and a lot of people will claim that the foods we do identify with are just bastardizations of other cultures. So in this video, I'm gonna give you 8 foods that actually are truly American foods, and we'll talk about their history as well. But first, if you're from this part of the world, here's a real quick disclaimer. Yo sé que American se refiere a personas o cosas de todo el continente, pero las personas o cosas de México se pueden llamar Mexican. Las personas o cosas de Canadá se pueden llamar Canadian. Las personas o cosas de Brasil se pueden llamar Brazilian. Pero en inglés no existe otra palabra para hablar de personas o cosas de los Estados Unidos de América. Por eso debo decir American. Gracias por su comprensión. Now, number one on the list is probably the only food that nobody is questioning is an American food, and that is hamburgers. In certain parts of Germany, there are a series of dishes that are basically a type of ground beef or minced beef steak. This includes Salzburg, which is where we get the Salisbury steak, and Hamburg, which is where we get the Hamburg steak. In the 1800s, when immigrants from Germany, particularly Hamburg, came to the United States, they brought that food with them, and a variation of the Hamburg steak became popular among German communities within the United States. Now, it's a bit dubious exactly when this happened or where exactly it happened, but at some point in America, probably at a fair or carnival, some German person made Hamburg steaks and put them in a sandwich with a type of French bread bun, and thus we would get the hamburger. The hamburger became very, very popular as street food within the US, and when fast food took over in the early 20th centuries, it was an easy thing to go to. When restaurants like McDonald's became ubiquitous nationwide and eventually spread out to the whole of the world, the hamburger was introduced to basically everybody, and everyone knew that it had its origin in America. And so yeah, the hamburger is American food. Number 2 on the list has a nearly identical origin to the hamburger, and that is the hot dog. A certain type of sausage was really popular in Vienna, Austria, and this sausage became known as the Wiener, or Wiener. There was a variation of the Wiener sausage which was made in Frankfurt, Germany, and it got the name Frankfurter, or Frankfurt, or just Frank. Again, German immigrants moving to the United States begin to make and eat variations of this sausage in America, and at some point, and again, like with the hamburger, we don't totally know, there's like 5 people who claim to have invented this, but at some point between 1890 and 1910, some guy at a fair or carnival was selling Wieners or Frankfurters and ran out of the wax, like, baking paper that they would wrap it in, so he went to a nearby food cart that had a bunch of French buns, sliced them open, and shoved the wieners in them, and thus we got the Wiener sandwich, I guess is what they probably called it, but eventually became known as the hot dog. Given that the hamburger is older and is a bit more disputed on its origin, I would say the true, unambiguous American food is, in fact, the hot dog. Fun fact, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is where I live, they have this terrible thing. It's basically like a corn dog, but if corn dogs sucked. And this crime against God and man is called hot dog, and the actual hot dogs are called American hot dogs. This is wrong, and they should feel bad about it. Number 3 on the list of American foods is buffalo wings. Created in 1964 in Buffalo, New York, yeah, that's where its name comes from, the buffalo wing is a chicken wing soaked in a type of cayenne pepper-based hot sauce. As the legendary story goes, some Italian-American kid and a bunch of his friends came home drunk at like 2 in the morning, being all rowdy and weird as young 20-somethings tend to do. The guy wakes up his mom being like, "Hey mama, make us up some food." She decided to make them some chicken wings, and to try to teach them a lesson on being a bunch of rowdy idiots, she put a gross amount of hot sauce in it. Unfortunately for her lesson, but very fortunate for the rest of the world, the buffalo wings were awesome. The kids loved it, and it ended up becoming a menu item at restaurants, and eventually just became the thing we know of. Nowadays, in most of the world, alongside hamburgers and hot dogs, buffalo wings are pretty easy to come by, and many countries now have their own developments and variations on the buffalo wing, taking the same unbreaded chicken wing deep-fried idea, but putting different kinds of sauces on it. Now, those three are the only three that I feel like most people with some knowledge of food history know are truly American. Now we're going to get to a couple that you might not know are American foods. The number 4 American food, spaghetti and meatballs. Now, the history of spaghetti and meatballs is really fascinating, at least to me. So in certain parts of southern Italy, long before people were moving to America, there already was a pasta dish that would take really tiny made-up balls of ground meat and combine it with pasta. Not long after that, however, parts of southern Italy, Sicily, Calabria, etc., became disproportionately poorer than the surrounding region, and things like beef were surprisingly difficult to come by. At that same time, once Italians knew tomatoes weren't actually poisonous, a sauce was developed in southern Italy with a focus on seafood. This tomato-based seafood sauce would get the name sailor sauce, or in Italian, marinara sauce. In the late 1800s, when Italian immigrants, mostly from the southern part of Italy, moved to the United States, they brought these ideas of meatballs and pasta and marinara sauce with them. But very lucky for them, both tomatoes and beef were way easier to come by and way cheaper in the US than they were back home in Italy. And so all of these influences combined, and Italian Americans began to make very large ground beef meatballs, or sometimes pork meatballs, and put them in a marinara-like tomato-based sauce. So the first recorded example of this type of pasta was from an American cookbook in 1888. However, the first time someone ever sold, quote, spaghetti and meatballs was in 1938. It was a canned variety being provided by a canned pasta chef, well, he wasn't canned, named Ettore Boiardi. This is the Ettore Boiardi that becomes Chef Boyardee. Now, I grew up eating spaghetti and meatballs like once a week as a kid, and I had no idea that, just like me, they were 100% American, but with Italian roots. So now we're getting to the ones that are going to be a little bit more surprising. Next American food on the list is banana bread. So in the 1930s, baking powder became way easier to get in the US and became cheaper. This is around the same time that bananas also started getting a little bit cheaper and easier to get in the US. Because of the Great Depression, a lot of people weren't really wanting to just throw their overripe bananas away, because that would be a waste of money, and it was, the Great Depression. So they started taking the overripe bananas and baking them into bread. Up until this point, bananas weren't really a dessert item. They were used in normal traditional foods for the places that bananas come from, but otherwise were kind of just eaten on their own. This development of baking bananas into bread, and specifically relying on the overripe bananas, got really popular, and by the 40s and 50s, a variation of banana bread was essentially in every cookbook in the US. These banana bread recipes spread throughout the whole of the world, and now I can go down to the local supermarket in my small town here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and pick up a loaf of banana bread, but they put chocolate in it, and I don't like that. Staying on the topic of desserts, we also have chocolate chip cookies. Now, the cookie is a variation of the tea biscuit, which originated in France but became much more popular in England and the UK. And of course, with all of the English colonists, the cookie became popular in the US. However, the story goes that it was in 1938 when someone named Ruth Wakefield was the first person to take a Nestle chocolate bar and chop it up into pieces and chuck it into a cookie. This is the origin of chocolate chip cookies and is why the brand Nestle Toll House is like immediately recognizable in that discussion. In the United States, a chocolate chip cookie is the #1 most popular flavor of cookie, and everywhere else in the world, it's somewhere within the top 5, if not #1. So if you enjoy Chips Ahoy, Famous Amos, or any other variation of the chocolate chip cookie, homemade or store-bought, you can thank America for that one. Coming up to the end, we're gonna get one that's really steeped in controversy, because one thing Europeans love to say Americans don't know anything about is cheese. Most Europeans only know American cheese through either the single sandwich slice, which is funny, they act like that's such a terrible thing, but you can buy it in their country too, or through weird cheese-adjacent products like Velveeta or Cheese Whiz. But in reality, the United States is one of the biggest producers and exporters of cheese in the world, and we don't just make it and produce it, we've created our own kinds. And probably the most famous cheese that was created in America is Colby cheese. Its name comes from Colby, Wisconsin, the city that it was developed in the 1880s. It's popular in cheese blends such as Colby Jack cheese. Essentially, anytime you're getting a Mexican cheese blend, you're probably actually getting an American cheese blend based on Colby. And it's a really popular type of cheese outside of the US as well. In places like Australia and New Zealand, you'll usually have like 5 cheese options, and one of them is always going to be Colby. And that is a cheese that was invented, developed, created, made, sold, exported entirely in America. You're welcome, world! And the last and probably most controversial food on this list is fajitas. Now, fajitas are one of the more popular foods in the type of cuisine known as Tex-Mex, which is short for Texas, Mexico. Tex-Mex food is made in the northern parts of Mexico and southern parts of Texas, and developed going all the way back to when Texas was still part of Mexico. Now, the most famous Tex-Mex dishes you'll think of, whether it be tacos or enchiladas or nachos, all were developed in Mexico, with some of them having a stronger American influence or weaker American influence. But fajitas is the only one that truly originates in Texas, and this is in 1969, so long after Texas is part of the United States. Fajitas is really the strongest Tex of the Tex-Mex foods. And since fajitas have interchangeable meat, they can be chicken or beef or something else, and they're served on flour tortillas instead of corn tortillas, they were way easier to become popular everywhere else in the world. And so although you'll see it at Mexican restaurants, fajitas are American food. So that was the histories of 8 examples of foods that are really and truly American foods. Please stop saying we never came up with anything. I hope you enjoyed this video. Yes, I am still working on the August Underground Most Disturbing Films review thing. It'll come out eventually, just give me a bit of time. Also, I've started streaming because I wanted to give people more things to watch while my long videos take time to make. I'm mostly going to be streaming Pokemon Snap because, fun fact, I'm actually a speedrunner for Pokemon Snap, but I haven't done it in a long time. There's another guy on the Pokemon Snap leaderboard who is also named Nolan, and he's right above me on the leaderboard, so my immediate goal is to be the best Nolan at Pokemon Snap by defeating my arch nemesis that probably doesn't know I exist. So if that sounds interesting to you, check it out. Subscribe so that you can actually watch stuff. Click the little bell or do the notifications or whatever if you want to know about the streams. Or you can follow me on X Twitter because I do post there that I'm going to be streaming before I stream. Anyway, I'm kind of getting hungry now. Thanks for watching.